Okay, and we are back in podcast number 3 of Lunch Talks with Matt and Brendan. And today we're going to talk about some of the ideas of the pro-life and pro-choice and those two sides. And, is it a dichotomy or is it actually something that can be blended? Kind of like what we talked about with homosexuality, how it's not necessarily picking one side or the other. It's kind of this, blend all the way across. So is it that or is it a dichotomy? And I think what you see a lot here is that idea of, we're pro-life and pro-life means anti-abortion, and vice versa. You can say, well, pro-choice means pro-abortion, and even anti-life, that you're killing life. And something that I read for my church, for the Episcopal Church, and the way that it stands on it is, it describes itself as both pro-choice and pro-life, in that it's a very liberal church, but the way that it sees this situation is we take this basis that we should respect all life, and all life includes both the life of the unborn and the life of the woman, and the rights of both of those, the rights of that unborn child to live, and then the right of the woman to choose what she would want, what she would want with her body. And really the way it looks at it is instead of looking on whether or not abortion is reasonable, because it says, yes, abortion is allowed in cases of, rape and incest and things where it's just, it would be a very horrible situation for the baby to actually be born. It says it's okay for that, but it's not something that should be exploited for mere convenience, quote unquote, that they use. Just because you wanted 3 children and you have a 4th coming doesn't mean that, we'll just get rid of it, But by the same token, it says that we should not be looking at abortion as our viewpoint on abortion as the treatment to unwanted pregnancies, but rather we should be looking on how can we administer contraceptives and birth control and things like that to help families control, their family planning, because obviously we can't have 10 children if you're having a family income of $40,000 a year. That's just not going to work. So they promote using contraceptives and things like that to protect the family from its dangers of having multiple. And that's a very interesting stance, because the Catholic Church says, well, don't use contraceptives because that's breaking the bond, of the marriage. It's saying, well, the marriage, you should have unprotected sex because that's what's going to make the man and the woman together become more of a bond.
But only in marriage, too.
Right, yeah. And only in marriage.
Yeah.
Because regardless, if you're having sex outside of marriage, then that's a totally different deal, which I have not done any research on what the Episcopal Church says, but pretty much like the basis that my church says, it's essentially a if you will, first world realistic church. It's like, look, we're just going to look at the things that are affecting it. We're not too worried about what they used to say or the old traditions and stuff. We're looking at, all right, how can we, and this is something that I've started to develop lately, is how can we take this set of beliefs that we have of loving all people and nurturing humanity to be better when I leave this earth than it was when I came here. What can I do and what can we do as a church to do that? And how can we do that using our modern means? So for example, contraceptives, whereas, the Catholic Church is very strict that you don't,
Okay, so something that I heard from someone who I believe is very, very credible source. I didn't actually look at the data myself or the research myself, but I heard this from this man named Paul Chek. Genius. He's an absolute genius. He says that the areas that have that don't talk about, that have shame around, or anything regarding, like you say, okay, just don't do sex, don't have sex, don't do contraceptives and anything like that. Those are the areas that have much higher rates of teen pregnancy and much higher rates of STDs because there's so much shame around it. Nobody's talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody's getting information around, so they don't really know what's going on with it. So I think whenever you try to put a label on something as bad or another thing as pure, you could actually potentially make things much worse. And when you bring in, you have said this question many times, quoting a nun, what is life?
Mm-hmm.
What truly means life? Like, are you pro-life or are you pro-living?
Mm-hmm.
And I personally am not really defined on where I am with abortion. It's not really something that I've thought too much on. But how many people around are pro-life, but they are also for these rules that diminish your ability to live well?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So you look at somebody who's, and I'm not trying to generalize here, but who's from a conservative background where they're religious and they're for following rules that don't necessarily make much sense to a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
Some of those rules completely diminish your ability to live. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like for example, if I see this beautiful skate park and it says don't skate here, it would be almost my duty to break that rule because I'm embracing life and I'm a living being. I'm a sentient being experiencing the universe that around me may not be sentient, like leaves and trees. They're not necessarily conscious of this. I am. I have a serious responsibility to live my life as full as I can. And if there's a rule that for some reason is against that, I don't necessarily see that as pro living, you know.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of that nun, you know, it's very interesting what she had said because, and this is coming from a devout Christian nun. I don't remember her denomination, but what she said is that there's a difference between pro-life and pro-birth.
Okay.
You know,
Okay.
And it still, I think, goes to the same thing that you're saying. You know, are you pro having the baby come out of the womb and that's it, or are you actually pro having that thing, that being, have a life? You know, and you know, so is it that you're just that every single conception should ever be ever be developed into a baby and then be born? Is that your stance, or is your stance that every human life on Earth should experience life and the beauties of it? Now, one part of it comes from, if it like you're talking about, if you're gonna create a world that is inherently inhibiting and controlling different aspects of life, thus creating society to be a society where life is not meant to be completely fulfilled, like you said.
It's a death culture.
Right, it would be like a death culture. Then what would be the point of being pro-birth and calling yourself pro-life if all you want to do is have that baby and not worry about what happens to it later on? You know, and that's one of the critiques on the Republican side, is that they say, okay, well, we're very pro-life and we believe that that the woman's choice was the choice to have sex, which is something that I support. You know, I think in cases where two people chose to have sex and the woman conceived a baby, then you need to have that baby. If you don't want to have a baby, then don't have sex or use contraceptives. You know, make that the choice rather than the choice to have to kill the baby, which is what the Episcopal Church stands for. And so, and it brings me back to what the nun said. Are you pro-life, where you're actually trying to enjoy life, or are you, pro-birth? And for the Republican side, if you call yourself pro-life and you want that you want every child ever to be born, and then you have the situation that they're born maybe into a poor part of a bad city. They have, they don't have a father or something. All they have is their mother. They grow up, they're delinquents and stuff, and then they say, well, no, we don't want to have welfare. We don't want to have any kind of schooling paid for. We don't.
Yeah.
We want the private sector to handle that. And then if the private sector doesn't cater to them, then how is that being pro-life? And something that Michael had said, and we had that kind of were you? No, I don't think you were there. We kind of had like a heated moment in English class. It wasn't heated, but it was like we were having a bit of a debate. And he said that what Coach was saying about, and you know which coach I'm talking about.
I don't know. Oh, okay,
Yes.
got it.
I'm going to keep the names out of it. But anyways, great coach. He said that he's not necessarily trying to say that these things are bad ideas. He's just saying it's not the government's job to do that. And I don't necessarily believe that that's what Coach, I don't think that's what his idea was, or that's not the way that he expressed it. But I think that's a very interesting point, that maybe the clash between the two parties is not on ideals, but rather who carries out those ideals. See what I'm saying? And I think that breaks down into what I've seen as the major split in the two parties. And the Democratic Party is more worried about getting society to a better place, and the Republican Party is more worried about getting the economy to a better place. Neither side is necessarily a bad idea. We want both sides to work together because we want a good economy and we want a good society. But then the problem comes when one tries to do something that will help their basis, that will help society for the Democratic side, like the ACA. Well, Republicans see it as, well, that's going to be a huge economic problem, and government shouldn't even be dealing with this because our economy is going to totally, crash because of this, and they might even, be a little bit bombastic in it, and say, oh, well, that's not going to work, or something, and try and shoot down the ACA because of its ideals, because of the idea that, not necessarily all people should receive health care, which to me doesn't completely make sense. But then when you apply it to what Michael had said, well, maybe their idea is just the government shouldn't be, there to take that, control. And of course, my response to that is, well, then what is government for? Is it just to have a military and to create a good economy? I guess that's just the split of the ideals,
I think putting economy over human value is like worshiping a concept while you harm living things.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like you're listening to your earphones when you're walking down the street, and you're so caught up in the music that you don't realize you're stepping on people. There's people lying down the road, and you're just walking over them because you're worshiping a concept. There's this Native American quote, and I don't exactly know what it, well, but it's, you will finally realize that once all the rivers have been polluted, all the trees have died, there are no more leaves or fruits or plants to eat, that you can't eat money.
Yeah.
And, it's very important to have a good economy, of course, but we shouldn't be placing these things. It's a human concept that we all agree on, that this stuff has value. And I'm not one of those people that says, oh, money is evil. You can do evil things with money, no doubt about it. It happens every single day. But money can enable you to live a wonderful life. But you don't have to throw away your own life to do it. And a lot of people, they sacrifice their entire lives to make money. And I think you should, instead of sacrificing your life to make money, use money to help you live a better one.
Mm-hmm. And something that just came to me, would it be unreasonable to say that if you had a perfect society where everyone was happy, this is, hypothetical, because I don't think that it can actually be attained, unless you have a 1984 or a
Yeah.
Brave New World situation where it's total, brainwashing. But if you were to actually have a real society that is really happy, that is, perfectly content, enjoys living, values other people above themselves, doesn't use money in a corrupt or evil way, yada yada yada. If you had a society like that, would the economy actually be, in a bad situation? Don't you think that those people would then want to be spending money? I mean, who cares? I'm happy. I have a perfect society. Nothing else could be better for me to exist and live other than to be in this society. So what does this paper even have any worth to me? Now, of course, this is one of those things where, just like in the political spectrum that we had mentioned, where you have communism and fascism both kind of end up in the same place in the totalitarian dictatorship thing. I think both the Democratic side and the Republican side kind of have their little circle where if you were to have a perfect society, the economy would take care of itself. And if you would actually have a perfect economy where actual trickle down that is claimed to exist, if you actually had trickle down existing, then we would have a perfect society. Because if you had an economy that could provide the entire nation with everything that they needed, then the society would be taken care of. But it's the fact that they withdraw themselves a little bit on that side, and the others withdraw themselves a little bit from that side, and it's like you're at the midpoints of the circle. You're trying to do everything you can to create a good society, and that doesn't explicitly or directly, I should say, affect the economy, but later it might indirectly affect the economy. And I think it's very difficult for some people to touch and feel indirect, relations.
Yeah. I know you've heard me say this a million times. Last year I said it all the time, but there's listeners who have never heard me speak before, so I'll say it again. And sorry for annoying you with this one, but and I heard this from a documentary called I Am. It was made by someone named Tom Shadyac. He was the producer of Bruce Almighty and a lot of things, and he had this incredibly lavish life, but he realized he wasn't any happier when that happened. Anyway, he created this movie called I Am about how connected we all are. There was one person in this who said the Native Americans have a word for something. They call it Wedico. And if you look it up on the internet, Wedico is someone who eats the soul of another. And he said that when Columbus came over on the ships, the Native Americans believed they were infected with Wedico. And you can see this kind of extreme hunger in people that causes them to destroy others on their path to feeling good about themselves. There's this bottomless pit that people try to fill themselves up with for accomplishments that I don't know. I feel like there's some kind of inherent sickness in our humanity or society that's causing these bad things to happen, or it could possibly just be the environment we're living in already. Like if you look at Blackfish, the documentary, orcas in their natural environment, they're very peaceful. They live a long time, and very happy communal animals. Well, if you watch Blackfish, when they put them in these cages, there were two of them. Their fins flopped over. They died at 20, and one just attacked and destroyed the other one. If you can extrapolate that out of, if you look at people in their natural environment, they're communal, peaceful, happy, whatever. You put people in houses, cubicles, buildings, that's basically like a cage. Mm-hmm. No one really equates that because they've been so disconnected. They don't realize how therapeutic nature is. Mm-hmm. And when you don't go out in nature and stuff like that, it can mess you up if you become disconnected from it for so long. What I'm saying is that could really cause a serious problem in our society. It could be not humanity sick, but the environment that humanity is in is causing a sickness that's causing the society to perpetuate that sickness. And it's like this this self-feeding cycle.
Mm-hmm. And I'll put up this picture that we have right here, but showing the size of the parking lot at SeaWorld versus the little green dot that is where the orcas spend their entire life. And that's pretty amazing, you know. I mean, I guess that's a big parking lot. But I'll put that up, and it's interesting looking at that, you know, how it's the way that we're all divided up, kind of like the orcas. It reminds me actually to a commercial that I saw for SeaWorld, and they were talking about how, you know, trust us, these animals are not being, you know, held in horrible, you know, captivity, you know, and things like that that are, you know, being detrimental to the large species. You know, those you know, they're inbreeding, you know, so they're not bringing people, you know, orcas from, you know, outside outside of SeaWorld. And in the final, like, you know, they take all these things, you know, it comes into the logo and whatever, and it's like, oh, you know, and and then the commercial goes off. In that, at least, I think one or two of the whales that, you know, that were going through the water had the floppy fin, the floppy dorsal fin. And I was like, if you were at least if you were actually, you know, trying to make a decent commercial, you wouldn't, and you know your SeaWorld, you would at least edit that out or change out something. Because when I went up to Seattle, or up into Victoria, and we went whale watching, I mean, those suckers were erect. You know, I mean, they were straight up. Yes, it's because that's the only way I could describe it. You know, and it's weird to think of it because seeing the little floppy dorsal fin, it's hard to think of like what that is actually doing or how that actually feels, because, you know, the way that it looks like in the wild, the only word you can just use to describe it is erect. It is straight up, and it is, you know, I mean, it looks like they're you know, energized. They're up doing something.
Yeah.
You know, and if you look at society, you know, we don't have a dorsal fin to show how we are. But, you know, don't you think that some of the people that we interact with on a daily basis have a floppy
dorsal fin? Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh! And I know I've said this to you many times, but what happens when I stop for a second? Sometimes in class, when we're in the middle of learning a lesson and the teacher's up there talking, and I'm focused, I'll take a pause for 30 seconds, and I stop and I turn around and look at the room, and I see the eyes of the people in the classroom. It looks dead. It's like everyone's just like slumped over in their chairs. There's no life there, and I know it happens to me too, because I've actually seen a video of me doing it. Like 2 years ago, I was playing Xbox, and my sister walked in and she took a video, and she's like, "This is what you look like playing Xbox." And I'm like, "Whatever, go away. I'm playing my game." She texted it to me. She sent me the video, and I looked in my eyes, and it was just like this glaze, man, like this lifeless glaze. And I feel like that's the equivalent of this floppy dorsal fin. Mm-hmm. Like it can also be manifested physically. Like if you look at anybody in a natural environment who's grown up there their whole lives, they can squat in a way where they squat basically where their butt's touching the ground, and that's their natural state of, like, they'll just sit down. They don't sit down cross-legged. Right. They actually just do that. Anybody from our school, you can't take anybody who can just naturally do that. Mm-hmm. That's just, you know. So it's
that would hurt.
Yeah, it would. I tried a lot. My knees start cracking and stuff. So I feel like it's a dorsal fin of spirit and of physicality as well.
Yeah, it pains me to think of, you know, when others don't think of or care for other people, and I guess the more I look at it, the more I see that, you know, people have either they have the instinct to have empathy or they don't, you know, and I don't know exactly how you can teach someone to have empathy. You know, I mean, a lot of people will say, you know, put yourself in their shoes, you know, or think about if this happened to you, you know, and so it's like, how do you work on that, you know, and that's what I think, you know, for me, what I try to do on a daily basis is have empathy and understand, you know, that other people are going through struggles, you know, and you know, everyone thinks that they're very, very special, because, they are the only person who they are, and they're a special human being. But the weirdest thing is to think that everyone else also believes that they are themselves special. Every single person on the face of the earth has the same consciousness, soul, human being inside them. So how do we get people to start, doing that? So I guess that's the question that I pose to society: is what do we need to do to increase empathy, to increase, love for other people, increase understanding, that, the whole society should be pro-life, and that meaning pro, living life to the fullest. So I guess with that, we will conclude our third podcast, our third edition of Lunch Talks, and we will continue doing podcasts about every Sunday. So check back in with us. Thanks.